Jim Jackson was a Scientologist from the late 1960s, and he waited all the way up to OT8 and eventually left Scientology. But he's most known by Scientologists as one of the partners of Greenberg and Jackson. That was his accounting firm with Marty Greenberg. They were both Scientologists, and they used to do many Scientologists tax returns starting in the early 1970s all the way through until the IRS tax exemption was gotten in 1993. Anyway, he's speaking out with us for the first time, and we talked to him about his experience in dealing with the Internal Revenue Service here in the United States for Scientologists at the time, and has many stories to tell that I think you're going to find very interesting. Without further ado, here's Jim Jackson. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our channel, Scientology, Peeling the Onion. My name is Mark Fisher, and I'm here with Janice Gillum-Grady. Good day, Janice.
Good day, Mark. Good day, everybody, and welcome to our show. We have a great show today.
We really do.
This is with Jim Jackson. And Jim Jackson is an accountant, and he's also a tax attorney, and he was very involved with Scientologists in doing their taxes. And I met him originally back on the ship in 1973 or 72. He did an audit project with my brother, and he was my father's tax accountant. And, you know, I've just been a good friend of his for a long time, too.
He also was, he made it up to OT8. Before leaving Scientology. He's no longer in Scientology. And he also was involved up to the point of getting the IRS tax exemption. He worked a lot with Scientology, with the people that were handling the tax exemption. And so we're going to talk a lot about that on this show. And I think people will find that interesting.
Oh, they'll find it very interesting. There's some good stories in there and a lot of information.
So without further ado, let's bring him on. Here he is, James Jackson, Jim Jackson. How you doing, Jim?
I'm all right. How are you?
We're doing good.
Good, Jim.
Good. Good to see you. Great. Hey, Jim, to start off, can you just give our viewers just a brief outline of your time in Scientology and your career and, you know, what you did and all that? Just a brief summary.
Yeah. Well, I first found out about it in 1968 when I moved from Chicago to Berkeley, California to try to find sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And after I've been in Berkeley for only a few weeks or a month or so, I saw flyers and signs for Scientology around the campus. I was in graduate school for one quarter in the MBA program there. I saw flyers and signs about it occasionally, but I didn't get involved with it immediately. But while I was in Berkeley in the fall of '68, I joined what's called an encounter group, I guess it is, sponsored by the YMCA. And I did that mainly because I was a very introverted person. I didn't speak to people particularly. And so I was trying to break out of that. And in this encounter group, there was a person, I think his name was Bill DeCarl, who knew about Scientology but hadn't really done anything in it yet. And he was talking about it sometimes, and it piqued my interest while he was talking about it. And I think he finally, in the latter part of 1968, got his grades, like 0 through 4. And I respected him a lot. I sort of paid attention to what he had to say. And he told me that it worked, and I should do it. And I was pretty desperate as a person because I was so introverted and didn't talk to people, and so I was looking for something to fix that, and so I decided to try it. And kind of interestingly, before I tried it, I think it was Look magazine came out with an anti-Scientology. You know, Scientology's PR even back then was kind of in the shitter, but I think Look magazine came out with an anti-Scientology article before I paid for any Scientology. And I asked Bill, what about that? His simple comment to me was, how do you learn about something? By reading the media or by trying it yourself? And that's all I needed to hear. And so I went into the Berkeley mission, and interestingly, the first course I took was called the Personal Efficiency Course. It was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night. And the first night that the course was held, a guy named John McMaster was speaking at a Hilton Hotel in San Francisco. So we all carpooled to the Hilton Hotel in San Francisco to hear this guy, John McMaster, speak. And I didn't know anything about Scientology yet. I hadn't read any books or anything like that. I listened to him speak for an hour and a half or something. I was just totally amazed at this guy. I didn't quite understand what he was talking about, but I thought to myself, whatever it is, I want that. And so that was Monday night. Then Wednesday night and Friday night, I took this little class. I think it was free in Berkeley called the Personal Efficiency Course. And I remember one of the anecdotes that the instructor gave, who later became one of my best friends for the next 20 or 30 years, was he was talking about the concept of re-stimulation, where if you're going through life and something in life reminds you of something in the negative part of your mind, you start to react in an irrational fashion. Anyway, he drew some sort of analogy to some guy who had been rejected the last 17 times, and he tried to ask a girl on a date or something, and that made him assume that it'll also happen on the 18th time. Since I think I might have still been a virgin or just had ended that. Anyway, that spoke to my ruin. You know, I wanted to get out of myself and be able to talk to girls, especially. When I heard that little analogy, that really sold me. Then I paid. Then I did the communications course, which I think cost $50, and lasted for a weekend or so, where you do the training routines to practice communicating with people. Did that for a weekend, and then I decided to pay for the grades, which was at that time were $800 minus a 5% advance payment discount, or $760, which will segue into my talk about taxes in a moment. And what impressed me about that was that back then they gave it wasn't like a money back guarantee, but it was they told me that if I didn't like it, I could get my money back. You know, I was still viewing this whole operation as a customer. You know, like a customer coming in to buy some therapy, and if the therapy didn't work, I could get my money back. And I think I even called the BBB to ask him what Scientology's reputation was with the Better Business Bureau. And believe it or not, they gave me a positive. They did not give me a negative reaction. They gave me some sort of a positive. So I paid the $800 down, or $760 down. But I had to wait 6 weeks to stop taking drugs because I was a big LSD person. So I waited 6 weeks before I could start the auditing. So I think the auditing finally started in May of '69, and I did it, and it changed me. You know, so I did the grades, and they did make me much more extroverted. I mean, I wasn't Mr. Charisma yet, but I still aren't. But so I decided to pursue it further, and then I paid for the Dianetic course, which I think cost $500 back then.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I paid $500 for that. I was on that for a year, and graduated. I think a year later, in August of 1970. And so to go into the taxes part, so when it came time to do I had a degree in accounting, which I'd chosen as a profession partly because I figured I could have a job and not have to talk to people, hunch over my desk and crunch numbers for the rest of my life, like Bob Cratchit and the Christmas Carol or something like that. So I got an accounting job near Berkeley with a sole practitioner, and he specialized mostly in taxes. And so when 1970 came around, I came time to do my own taxes, and I had made about $2,000 in 1969, and had given away about $2,000 to the Church of Scientology, right? And I had heard that the IRS considers Scientology to not be tax deductible. We lost our tax exemption in 1967, and I did a draft of my tax return with and without taking Scientology off as a donation deduction, and the difference was the difference between the zero tax if I wrote off my Scientology and some tax. I forget how much it was going to be. It wasn't a lot of tax on $2,000, but it was more than I wanted to pay. I realized pretty early on that my favorite number is zero when it comes to tax. And little did I know what this is going to mean in the future when I started doing taxes for thousands of other people. But I did my own tax return. And the thought that the IRS considered it not deductible did not bother me hardly at all. I just thought, IRS is bad, Scientology is good. It's a church, it ought to be deductible, and if I subtract it off as a deduction, it'll bring my taxes down to zero. I think it was in 1969. So that was my start in the illustrious career that followed after that. And so I worked for this guy until 1972 and continued doing auditing and training in Berkeley and San Francisco until 1972. Then in 1972, I moved down to Los Angeles to do the higher levels that were only offered in Los Angeles, and got a job with another CPA firm down there. And I started to do tax returns for individual Scientologists that found out about me through the grapevine, and I would do their taxes in my apartment at night after my regular job. And I was doing the same thing. A lot of them had a lot of Scientology donations to take off on their Schedule A. It's called Schedule A is the form where you take donations off. And so I started doing that at night after work. And again, the fact that the IRS considered it not okay to do was not bothering me a bit at that point, because I just thought they were wrong and we were right, and simple as that. And then I think a couple years after that, I met Marty Greenberg. Marty Greenberg, who formed the firm with me called Greenberg and Jackson, which, by the way, still exists. They still call it. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I probably couldn't walk in there without somebody calling 911 or something. But Greenberg and Jackson still exists. Marty Greenberg passed away some years ago, but
yeah, I'd heard that.
Yeah, company still exists, and so I met him in 1971 when I came down to Los Angeles and Berkeley to do. I think maybe I was doing power processing, and I met him. He was in the Guardian's office. His title was CPA US.
Right.
And when I first met him, I thought he was sort of cracking a little joke, but he said, "Oh, Greenberg and Jackson," when he found out I was a CPA. I wasn't a CPA yet, actually. I passed the exam, but to get your certificate as a CPA, you have to finish an internship. So I haven't finished my internship yet, but I passed the exam. And so I met him, and that was one of the first things he said was, "Oh, Greenberg and Jackson," which later came to be a somewhat famous.
And this was before you came to the ship?
Yes, this was, I met Marty in 71, and I came to the ship in 73.
Okay.
2 years later. Yeah. Marty kind of engineered that. I had to take a 2-week vacation from my regular job to go to the Apollo. And 1973.
So this night, Janice, why don't you explain to what he was doing why he was there?
Well, there's the Apollo. And
Right.
in the forward part of the ship, on the left side here, down below, you guys were below the portholes, weren't you, Jim? Or did you have a porthole?
I don't remember if we had a porthole. I remember they called it the bow steering flat, whatever that.
Yeah, I don't think you guys had a porthole, but anyway,
Yeah, it was a windowless room.
Yeah, that very first, underneath the Apollo, that first porthole, that is about the area where Jim was working on the audit, what was called the audits project. And that's where the Guardian's office was. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. The Guardian's office was being audited by the IRS and needed to get all their records in order. And they had so much expenditures without invoices. They needed to do up invoices to match with the expenditures. Is that right, Jim?
I don't remember if it was the Guardian's office per se that was being audited by the IRS.
Yeah, well, it was Mary Sue who was overseeing that whole project.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember we did a lot of matching of invoices to expenditures, but what the overall intention was of that project, I kind of don't remember that well anymore. But
here you are.
Yeah, there I am.
Yeah, so on the right,
yeah,
with the glasses and the striped shirt, that's Jim, and right behind him with the mustaches, Marty Greenberg from Greenberg and Jackson.
There you go.
That's right.
And then
your brother is up on the top row, second from the left, correct?
Yeah, it kind of in the middle of the photo is my brother, and to the right is Sandy Holman, who we've had on this show before.
Yeah.
And the front left, that's Ellen Reynolds.
Right.
She's still in the Sea Org from what I hear.
Really?
And is that, yeah, she's still there. And is that Ted Street behind her?
Yeah, that's Ted Street on the top left, who I still know. I think I do some work for him in present time, actually, some tax work for him.
Okay, yeah, and his sister worked on the ship, Martha Street. And then I don't know who that person is next to you.
That might be, I might be wrong. Carl Hill was his name, maybe, or something. That's all I'm coming up with.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, why were you brought there? What were you told when you were coming to the ship, and what was that like? Because you'd been in Scientology for a few years at that point.
I've been in Scientology about 4 years at that point. I was basically, if my memory serves me, I was just asked by Marty to help out on a project, and I had a 2-week vacation from my regular job in downtown LA. I was working for a small Japanese CPA firm, believe it or not, called Shigeji Takeda. We had Honda as a client, and he asked me to help out, and I said yes. And I was glad it was only 2 weeks because it was a pretty physically miserable place to work. Marty was there for months.
Yeah.
In fact, the fact that Marty was there for months helped start my practice to accelerate, because Marty was still there when tax season of 1974 came around. Marty did a lot of tax returns for Scientology parishioners in his off hours in the Guardian's office, and when tax season 1974 came around, he wasn't around to do any of these tax returns because he was still in the Apollo. So his secretary or other GO staff or whatever started referring his clients to me, and I started doing their tax returns when I was off work at night, and that's how I started doing more and more Scientology parishioners' tax returns and taking more and more Scientology off as a deduction on their tax return. Getting much more, because in my regular job, none of our clients were Scientologists. They're just normal people, regular people, right?
Right. Normal people. What?
Yeah.
Oh, we like Honda. We had Honda as a client, like I said. So that was kind of fun. And I started to realize how much more money I could make too. I think back then I charged a standard fee of $25 for a tax return, and they usually take me an hour. And I was making um, price of $4 or $5 an hour in my regular job. And I said, oh, this is much
Pretty good
more,
money back then.
yeah, much. That's the beefier rate of pay. I realized how that. And I also started to realize it was a lot of fun to take Scientology off on a tax return, knowing that it was against the IRS's rules and regulations. And I enjoyed doing it. I sort of felt I was a freedom fighter, and every time I subtracted Scientology off on a tax return, I was doing it for a just cause. And I was really getting into it. I was really enjoying doing that.
Jim,
So,
can I ask you a question?
yeah.
At some point, did the IRS contact you or someone saying, "Hey, no, you can't deduct this stuff"?
Yeah, they sure did. Well, I don't recall when the first audit happened of a return I prepared, but it was fairly early on. Back then, the IRS was auditing Scientologists at a rapid rate. Not really because of any discriminatory intention. It was more just the mathematics of it were such that you get some guy making $25,000 a year and he donates $25,000 to a charity, it waves a flag, the flag.
Yeah, red flag. Yeah.
Yeah, red flag, and it was mostly just the mathematics of it that were triggering all these audits because the Scientologists were writing off proportionate to their income so much of a higher percentage than your average non-Scientologist. And so the audits started coming in at a regular rate, and I very quickly became adept at representing people in audits, not just for their Scientology, but oftentimes if they audited a taxpayer because of their Scientology contributions, they would pick some other things to audit as well to just make the audit more complete. So I started getting a lot of experience in handling audits and representing people before the IRS in the early 1970s when they were coming down so much on Scientologists, and it was quite a battle. I remember one of the chapters of the battle was in 1978. Yeah, 1978, the IRS came down with what's called a revenue ruling. A revenue ruling is like an official pronouncement of IRS interpretation of the tax code. And I remember Marty called me up one day and said, Jim, I got some bad news for you. The IRS came out with a revenue ruling 78-189 that officially announced that donations to the Church of Scientology are not deductible. Prior to that, it was just an internal IRS policy, but now it's like broadcast to the whole world that Scientology is not deductible.
Right.
But I kept deducting it anyway. And the audits kept increasing and increasing because of the flag factor and so on. And what would happen, the IRS would disallow the donations to Scientology, and I would appeal it, and the appeals division would reject the appeal. And then the next step that was taken after the IRS rejected the appeal of the denial of the donations was to go to the United States Tax Court and file a petition with the United States Tax Court to tell the tax court that we don't agree with the disallowance of the Scientology donation and we want the tax court judge to adjudicate it. And I started filing. By the time the IRS gave the church its exempt status in 1993, and I think at that event in 1993, they announced that about 2,500 tax court cases were resolved in our favor when the IRS settled with the Church of Scientology in 1993. I had put about half of them there myself, either through myself or Greenberg and Jackson. So probably 50% of the cases in the U.S. tax court that resolved in our favor in 1993, me or my company, Greenberg and Jackson, had put there ourselves.
Right.
Which represented.
With these individual, these were tax returns for individual Scientologists, or were these also the organizations of Scientology too?
Just individual Scientologists.
Got it.
Yeah, they were individual Scientologists. And so basically from the early 70s until 93, when we finally won our exempt status, which was about 20 years, I was writing off Scientology on tax returns, knowing the IRS was that was against IRS policy. Not only was it against IRS policy, but in 1989, a tax return that I happened to prepare myself, called the Robert L. Hernandez tax return, went to the U.S. Supreme Court on the issue of whether Scientology donations were deductible or not. And we lost that case, it's called the Hernandez case, in a split decision. I think it was, there were two dissenting opinions. O'Connor and Scalia sided with us. When I say us, I mean Scientology, of course. And so during that period, we had a U.S. Supreme Court case that was decided against us, and I had to make a decision whether to keep deducting Scientology or not. And needless to say, I kept deducting it anyway. And as a result of that, they audited Greenberg and Jackson a fair amount. And let's talk about that for a moment. During this period, one solution to the problem of that flag waving back and forth, if you write off Scientology as a charitable contribution, it's like we said, it waved a red flag on the tax return. But if a Scientologist had his own business, and you bury the Scientology expenses in the business, it did not wave that flag because it was buried inside of a business. The first example I can think of is Greenberg and Jackson 1978 tax return, which I have a copy of here. The Greenberg and Jackson 1978 partnership return, Marty Greenberg and I were partners, showed a gross receipts of, I think, $69,000. And I had just paid for my knots, I think, in that year, which was a little over $12,000. So I deducted the Scientology not as a charitable contribution, because I didn't want that flag to keep waving, but I wrote it off as a business expense inside the Greenberg and Jackson tax return. And I started doing that with many Scientologists that have their own businesses for the purpose of reducing the chances of an audit and saving them lots of money as well, needless to say. But the IRS caught that with Greenberg and Jackson, and the problem with writing off Scientology as a business expense is that it's not the intention. The intention of donating to a church is that you are donating to a church. Writing off as a business expense is just a way to hide it, you know. And when I knew that, and the IRS knew that, so they were pretty unhappy with my doing that. And I did a lot, and it did save, many millions.
Can I ask you a question, Jim?
Sure.
Obviously, I mean, you're an experienced CPA and accountant and this and that type of thing. To the average person like me or somebody on the street, if the IRS is going like, hey, you can't do this, and we're auditing you and all that sort of stuff, we would freak out. Do you know what I mean? But You're experienced enough that you know that even though they denied it, you still had appeals that you could take, right? I mean, that's what you were doing. You would appeal it, like you said, to, you know, the tax court or whatever. So you weren't afraid of taking that on. Is that right?
I wasn't afraid. I mean, some other CPAs and attorneys were afraid,
Uh-huh.
and because of that, I sort of became a nationwide clearinghouse for the country. People would call me up from all over the country, even attorneys and accountants would, to get the Jim Jackson, the Jim Jackson pep talk. You know,
Yeah.
the Jim Jackson pep talk. I think I was like one part tax professional, one part registrar. Registrar was like a Scientology salesman,
Yeah.
and one part freedom fighter. And I had this down. I would get hundreds of phone calls a year, maybe, from all over the country to reassure people that they're taking Scientology was something they should do, you know, despite the Supreme Court ruling against us and the revenue rulings against us and so on and so forth. And so I did that. I did that probably for upwards of 20 years. And my closure rate was, I don't know what my closure rate was entirely because I wasn't the accountant for all these people, but I was close to 100% because I was really good at it, you know. And I felt I had a purpose, not just to save people money, but I was fighting it for a just cause, right? So
Right, because you were defending Scientology basically as a parishioner, you know, that people should be able to deduct it because it's spiritual, it's religion, it's whatever. Even though the IRS had determined it wasn't, you still were fighting that fight, right?
right, I still find that fight. Yeah. And in retrospect, in preparing for this podcast, I was talking to an old colleague of mine that used to work at Greenberg and Jackson, and I had no protection for myself. I didn't have any malpractice insurance. Like imagine if all those cases that I sent to the tax court, what if Monique Yingling and the gang did not get our tax exemption? What if we lost and all these parishioners now owed millions of dollars? Who
Yeah,
would they
that'd be on you.
they'd be yeah. And I didn't really think about that back then. I didn't have any E&O insurance or malpractice insurance. I didn't have to sign any retainer agreements that got me off the hook. That I was just giving them advice, which could go either way. I was just kind of doing it like a freedom fighter. Yeah, if we had not gotten our exempt status, I'm sure, even though in the pep talks I give on the telephone to people, I would let them know that the IRS was denying it and that we might lose our appeals and even when we lost the Supreme Court case, we started to even relitigate that. I would tell them that verbally, but you know, in Scientology, we know if it isn't written, it isn't true. It's all verbal. You know, I had nothing covering my ass in writing at all. You know,
Right.
So, so when we finally got the exempt status in '93, that was off mine.
Hey, Jim, let me ask you another question. Did they ever, like, you know, the IRS has a criminal investigation division as well. Did they ever like threaten you with stuff, you know, because you were doing all of this, or?
Yeah, they did. Toward the end of it, I don't remember the exact date, maybe 1990 or something like that. I was talking to an appeals agent who was getting kind of pissed off at our own return. I was still writing off Scientology on the Greenberg and Jackson return as administrative expense or some BS like that. And he finally said the word that was lurking there. He said, "Jackson, this is fraud," he said to me, you know. And my reaction, which in retrospect, you know, kind of didn't make sense, but it worked. I just lost my temper at the guy and just started yelling at him and telling him, "You're a bigot. You're a bigot." With an emphasis on the B and the word bigot. And I said that maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And he hung up on me. And about a week went by, and I thought, well, am I going to finally get a criminal referral, or writing off Scientology as a business expense was not kosher, and amazingly, after about a week went by, not only did I not get an indictment or anything, or a referral to CID, Criminal Investigation Division, the guy allowed it. The guy allowed it as a business expense. Like, what?
Wow.
And I did not. I don't like a gift horse in the mouth, so I didn't ask him why. But all I can think of is my righteous indignation, or whatever I was manifesting in that phone call, must have had some effect on him, and he decided not to bother with me anyway. But he could have so easily, he could have at least sent me a notice of deficiency, like they did to everybody else, and maybe go to tax. But he didn't even do that. He allowed the whole thing, which was quite a bit of money too at the time. It was like 50 grand. I forget the amount, but it was fairly decent sum. And so that was kind of a in the spiritual universe or whatever, it was sort of a turning point in a way, because they never came after me after that personally. And then 3 years after that, in 1993, we got a exempt status granted. And I've heard that in that settlement agreement in 1993, any taxpayer that wrote off their Scientology as a business expense, those people were not covered. So those people still had to pay. So the IRS was still kind of pissed off at people that did it that way, because that wasn't the proper way to do it. And by the way, the arguments we had against the IRS was basically an administrative inconsistency argument. Administrative inconsistency is referring to the fact that other religions have what are called fixed donations sometimes. Like, I forget what church it is, but some churches have pew rentals, which are a fixed price, and to sit in the pew, you have to pay a certain fixed amount. We would cite that as an example of administrative inconsistency. The Mormons had tithing, which is based on their income. Right. There are some other examples. So when we lost the Supreme Court case, Scalia and O'Connor cited those inconsistencies in their dissenting opinion against the IRS. And that was our basis legally for continuing to deduct it even after we lost the Supreme Court case. Yeah.
Jim, wasn't the IRS's one of their, I don't know if it was their only argument, but one of their main arguments is that when you were buying a service from Scientology, say a Dianetics course, you were getting something in return. It was a quid pro quo. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to give you this money and you guys do what you want with it. You actually were buying a book or buying services that had a price. Is that right? Wasn't that the IRS argument?
Yeah, that was their argument. Like you said, it was called the quid pro quo argument, which is Latin for this, for that, I think. And they said the purpose of the Internal Revenue Code was to allow gifts and donations. And a gift or donation is some money you give to an entity with no expectation of anything in return.
Right.
Especially nothing as specific as what we have in Scientology, where we have a price list and an exact pricing structure. That was their basic argument. You're not giving away money, you're buying something. And our counter argument to that was that, well, maybe we're buying something, but we're buying is solely intangible in nature and spiritual in nature, and therefore it should not be considered a quid pro quo. That was our counter argument.
Right.
And we lost that argument in the Hernandez case. But,
well, I remember LRH kept insisting it was donations. You got to keep calling it donations for the purpose of the IRS, so that we wouldn't get in trouble for it, of charging a set price. Though we had a set price, it was changed to suggested donation, something like that. And that was back in the late 70s. Yeah.
Well, my memory is that when I would go to a registrar, it was never suggested. It was always very fixed.
Well, let me ask you this, Jim. Well, let me ask you this, Jim. Was it a problem when LRH, when they decided to start raising the prices 10% every month or
Oh,
whatever in
yeah.
77 or whatever? Did that cause problems with the IRS in terms of deductions and showing, look, you keep raising your prices each month?
The buy now.
Yeah. Well, only in the sense that it made the numbers much larger.
Yeah.
You know, when the prices went up 5% a month back in the, whatever it was, the late 70s, was it, or early 80s? You know, like I said, when I first started getting auditing in 1969, it was like $25 an hour, and by the 1980s, it was $600 an hour. So
Yeah.
only in the sense that it made the amounts, the flag wave, much more widely than before.
Now, just let me ask you a question, okay? Separating from individual Scientologists, did you ever get involved then with the organization's tax returns with the IRS and the fight against the IRS, or was that handled separately?
That was handled separately. I did tax returns sometimes for the, what do you call them, the lesser. And I was not involved at all in the negotiations with the IRS.
And then same thing with L. Ron Hubbard's tax situation. You weren't involved with that, right? Because, I mean, he was being investigated. You know, the IRS was after LRH saying that money was being sent to him. Inurement was the word. In other words, he was reaping all these financial benefits from Scientology. And that was why they had the criminal investigation division, you know, looking into him and other people saying he was. And then when he died, that all went away, basically.
Yeah. Well, I was involved with that in the sense I represented LRH in his audit for a few years, and I can't go into detail on that. Obviously.
Yeah, I understand.
But I can say, however, that and I was the sole person representing LRH on some of his tax returns for the early 1980s, and I never saw any real allegations from the IRS about unreported income or skimming or anything like that. I'm just saying, when I represented LRH personally in his individual tax returns, I never really had any problems with allegations of annulment or unreported income or anything like that. The audits went pretty successfully.
Well, I'd like to interject here that LRH never did any of his own accounting. He had an accountant who did all that and submitted all that to Jim or whoever was doing the taxes. So he himself was not involved in, you know, how much money he made in reporting that to the IRS.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I did his taxes, it was through Author Services.
Right.
Which I think your sister was the ED of for a while.
Yep, that's right. Well, you know, speaking of my sister, when Miscavige and Marty were doing the whole IRS thing, my sister had already left Scientology, and she knew stuff from Author Services. So they had a private investigator set up this whole thing. Mark, you and I talked about this in one of our other shows. They set up this whole thing to get my sister out of the U.S. and to Australia so that if the IRS had any questions, she wasn't available to be questioned.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then she came back, and she wanted to come back, and someone was trying to talk her into staying. She's like, "No, I'm going back to the U.S. I'm done." And she came back anyway, and then they had the big win. So,
right. Yeah. So I knew your sister a little bit when she was the ED of Author Services. When I was doing LRH's tax returns, I worked mostly with Lyman Spurlock.
Yeah.
Yeah,
did Lyman work with you before he got into the Sea Org, or no?
Yeah, I worked for Lyman before he joined the Sea Org. Yeah. So, Lyman.
I recruited Lyman for the Sea Org.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was funny because Lyman was an accountant at the time, but he was also a Class 6 auditor, he and his wife, Carol. And I was on a mission from LRH to recruit Class 6 auditors. And Lyman was on my list. I talked to him and Carol, and he was like, "You mean I can do nothing but audit?" And I'm like, "Yep." And he says, "You're not going to put me in any finances?" And I'm like, "Nope, you're going to strictly go up there and you're going to train under Hubbard to be an auditor." And so he was like, "Okay, where do I sign?" And so he and Carol came up and they started auditor training and do under LRH, though they were already trained. They did further training. And then LRH went off the lines, and gradually people found out Lyman's experience in accounting. And the next thing you know, he's back in accounting.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that part. But
Yeah.
Yeah, he was involved with the whole corporate sort out, and also, you know, the IRS stuff and that type of thing. And then eventually, like you said, Jim, he went over at Author Services for a long time. I don't know if he was the person you were dealing with over there, or if there was Ryland Hawkins or somebody else. I don't know, but
yeah, it was I was dealing mostly with Lyman, who I had already known from before.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Lyman eventually got, you know, he got in trouble with Miscavige or whatever, ended up at Gold, and then he passed away in 2014, I think. When I got the photograph of you, Jim, earlier today, I saw that Tony Ortega did a thing about Lyman and with you in it, and it was like 2014, I think it was, that he passed away.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Speaking of the IRS win in 1993, Jim, I know at that time you were good friends with my dad, and
Yeah, that's an anecdote. I ran into your dad, I think, in maybe April of '93, and by then I'd already I went to law school for 5 years to become an attorney for the church, and I just started working at Bowles and Moxon, it was called, the church's in-house law firm.
Rick Moxon.
Rick Moxon and Tim Bowles and about 10 other lawyers. And so I was just starting with them as a brand new novice attorney. I was going to save the world and all that. I was disappointed at all the legal losses that we've been suffering, like Wallersheim and so on and so forth. And so I went to law school for 5 years on my own dime at night after work to become a lawyer for the church, and Bowles and Moxon hired me. I sold Greenberg and Jackson to go work for the church. And one day I ran into your father, Peter, and he started, I guess the term that we used to use for it is natter. he started complaining about the fact that he couldn't talk to you or your sister anymore because of them having been, I don't know if you were declared or what the deal was.
We were declared for having left the Sea Org.
Okay.
And he originally, when we first left, he came and visited us, and there was a private investigator there who reported to the church that he was up there visiting us. And so he got pulled into ethics, and he was then sec-checked for 2 years by OSA, the Office of Special Affairs. And he'd even sent us a message saying, "I can't talk to you. When I can, I'll get back in touch." And we didn't hear from him for like 5 years or something like that. But yeah, so he got in trouble for talking to us, and I guess he was nattering to you about it, and then that got you in trouble.
Yeah, it got me in deep trouble. He was, I hate to use the word nattering, but he was complaining to me about not being able to talk to you and your sister, and it was kind of out of the blue too. I ran into him one day, and he immediately started nattering about that, and then I checked on it, and someone told me that he was being audited at OSA, and I made a miscomputation. That they're handling it. you know. But it was the opposite. When Peter in his next day's sec check coughed up the fact that he'd mattered to me, Osa was wondering, why didn't Jackson write up your father on a knowledge report or something? You know, what's wrong with Jackson? And so I got called in immediately to sec checks for failing to write up a report on your father for nattering about nothing. I'll talk to you and your sister. And as a result of me being sec checked, I was fired from OSA within a week or so when they found out all the other natter that I'd been.
Wait, you were fired? You were fired from where?
Moxon and Balls.
Bolton Moxon. I was fired from Bolton Moxon.
Okay.
Yeah, I was fired from Bolton Moxon, and that was triggered by talking to your father.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It was triggered by it. I mean, they fired me more because they saw how much I was nattering on my own, besides talking to your father. But
Right.
I think it's Kurt Weiland, I think, was the person who told me that.
Yeah, he was the commanding officer at OSA or whatever.
Yeah.
A fairly intimidating figure.
Let me ask you a question. We're nearing the end here of this hour, and we'll go into some other stuff. But I was going to ask you. So when they finally got the IRS settlement or whatever in '93, whatever it was, you weren't working on that, right? In other words, that was other people that were working on that at that time.
Yeah, I was not working on that because I sold Greenberg and Jackson in 1992 and went to work for Bolton Moxon right after that. And I was not working on that settlement. In fact, I had to get special permission even to attend the event. Remember the big event they had? Was it the Shrine Auditorium or someplace?
Yeah, we weren't there.
Yeah, we'd heard about
I know
it.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was still getting sec checked by OSA in October, and I had to get permission to even attend the thing.
Is that because of talking to Peter Gillum Sr.?
Yeah, triggered by that.
Oh my God. Janice, look at the trouble you all caused.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing, huh?
Yeah, I sat up in the bleachers, and I remember as I was exiting the event, at least one person came up to me and said, "Why didn't you get a trophy too?" And I thought to myself, I'm lucky to be attending this damn thing, not mention not getting a trophy. But,
Yeah.
you know,
Were you still nattering?
I learned how to shut up by that. You know, I said nothing to that person. I learned how to keep my mouth shut. You know?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to mention too about, we're Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard and David Miscavige was worried about the IRS taking all the money. Basically, if there was a huge judgment against Scientology, it would wipe it out. So that was a creation, right, Janice, of Sea Org reserves. And that was LRH's. That's why the price increases were going up and all that was because he was so worried. He was so paranoid that he was going to jail and that they were going to shut everything down that, it became like I remember when we left in 1990, Sea Org reserves at that time was like $350 million. And what didn't even include the L. Ron Hubbard estate, but it was like around 350. And now it's billions of dollars, whatever it is, you know what I mean? From all these donations from these rich people just giving money to Scientology for whatever thing. But like back in the day, Sea Org reserves was actually the money that was, a portion of the services people paid for that went to Sea Org reserves, right?
Yeah, but there was also a difference. It's not Sea Org reserves, but it was like any money outside the U.S. was to go into outside the U.S. accounts. It was not to come into the U.S. That way, it protected that money from the IRS coming after it. And that way, if the IRS took down Scientology in the U.S., they had reserves outside in order to restart, which is also why Hubbard, when he passed away, he was building up his own reserve because he kept saying, if the IRS takes down Scientology and we lose it, I'll at least have these funds in order to start it up again. And he said that was a problem he had back in the 50s. He didn't have the funds when he lost Dianetics.
Right. And then that his estate was to go to the Church of Spiritual Technology when they got tax exempt status, which happened in 1993. And then that money all went into the CST, Church Science Spiritual Technology or whatever. Right.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Yeah. But my whole point is that Sea Org reserves, that $350 million or whatever it was at the time, it was in that range, right? That actually was money from the services that were being delivered to people. It wasn't from donations of, I'm going to donate $1 million so I get a bowling trophy and then I'm now a patron or whatever. At that time,
exactly.
this is
exactly.
It became after we left that they started heavily doing the IAS donations and statuses. It started a little earlier and was small, but then it went big time after we were gone.
Yeah, and now that you bring up the IAS, that was also part of the reason the free winds was gotten in the first place was so the IAS could be kept offshore and not in the U.S. And so then it was like, oh, well, what other purpose are we going to give the ship? And that's when it was like, oh, let's give them OT8 and set that up. But the initial purpose was to keep that money offshore from the U.S.
Right. You're right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then Jim, I don't know if you know this or not, but I was actually in the meeting when the first idea came up for the International Association of Scientologists, because I was working for Miscavige at the time, and I was at ASI. I just happened to be there that day, and he wanted me in the meeting. And Chris Cobb, the attorney for Scientology, he's the one who suggested it, because he said, do you remember the Safe Environment Fund for Mary Sue and all the defendants that on the FBI raid, right? Yeah, well, he said, look, we researched it. We never got any refund requests for the Safe Environment Fund. He goes, we need to put this money offshore and we'll set up this whole thing. And the IAS, within 2 months, they were in St. Hill signing the declaration and all that sort of thing. And that was how the IAS was born. It was like Jana said, it was to get money offshore and get it safe,
Yeah.
Anyway. That makes sense. Yeah. I think the IAS was formed in 84, so it wasn't until 84, I think.
Yeah, no, it was. It was like 84 or whatever it was. Yeah. But anyway, hey, I have a question for you. So when they did settle in 93, right? So then like all of your past tax returns and stuff you did for the Scientologists and stuff like that you deducted, did that all get forgiven by the IRS?
All got forgiven and all the deficiencies were settled out at zero.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you started doing this in 1970 or 71 for people, and by 93, you were right when you said, oh, I'm deducting all this stuff, and I don't care what the IRS says, and then they fought it, and then they got the settlement and all that. And did you ever have to pay any penalties or whatever, or did you ever get in trouble with the IRS personally for doing all that, or was it just a win?
I got in trouble, but it was always just threats and proposed assessments. Because when the 93 win occurred, all of my potential liabilities went to zero also. So,
right.
Like I said, in retrospect, since I wasn't covering my ass very well back then, if we lost that, somebody could have come after me for interest and penalties. The IRS has a whole family of penalties. Did I mention that? I can't remember if I've already talked about this or not, but the IRS was assessing preparer penalties on me toward the end. You know what a preparer penalty is?
No.
That's
Go ahead, tell us.
That's a penalty they assess on an accountant who is considered a problem preparer that's disregarding the Internal Revenue Code or the rules and regulations, and they considered Greenberg and Jackson a problem preparer because we were the clearinghouse for all these tax returns that were unlawfully deducting Scientology on it. So toward the end, I think we'd had quite a few thousands of dollars of preparer penalties assessed against us, which are waiting appeal of the. They finally all got waived also when the settlement occurred in October '93. But if those preparer penalties had been upheld, I would have probably gone bankrupt, or I can think.
Well, the other thing too, I was going to mention, Janice, I don't know about you, but Jim Greenberg and Jackson did my tax returns when I was in this York, because they would do all the RTC. I mean, like, we got money and stuff, and I would pay Greenberg and Jackson, and they would do my tax return to the IRS each year.
Yeah, that makes sense. We did see our people's tax returns. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I know Jim also did my dad's taxes, and my dad always spoke highly of Jim and how much he saved my dad, especially in penalties, because my dad was one of those people that didn't believe in paying taxes. So, yeah, but okay. Then Scientology wouldn't let him on services unless he paid his taxes and got that sorted out. And so Jim had to handle this whole backlog of all his taxes and all the penalties and getting that cleared up so that he could breathe, because they were going to take his company away from him. And that's a whole nother story on what happened with that. But but Jim, you saved my dad's butt on his taxes.
Oh, good. My memory of that's a little dim, but that's cool if I did that.
We've reached like just over an hour here, so we'll go ahead. Jim, we'd like to have on. We're going to have you on some of our other episodes because we want to talk about your time in Scientology, doing Scientology, and then why you left and all that. But also, we'd like to get your information and opinion on once the tax exemption was there. Obviously Scientology has been using that for all these years just to basically stop any kind of lawsuits or anything like that. And we'd love to get your opinion. I'm sure our viewers would too, in regards to that and how they achieved that. So we'll have you on again, obviously very soon, if that's okay with you.
Okay, sounds good. That was fun.
Okay,
good.
Great. Well, the next thing I have to do is we've got a sponsor, which is Outback Naturals. This is Janice's company, right, Janice? And this is your complete liquid multivitamins. Basically, it's peach flavored. It comes in that jug there, and it's a month's supply. And you keep it in your refrigerator, shake it up, 2 tablespoons, or drink a little shot glass of it, and you got all your vitamins are there. You don't have to take a handful of pills. And what's the slogan, Janice?
Ditch the pills and drink the power.
That's right. And all you have to do is go down below in our merchandise store, click on it, and Janice will ship it. You can order it there, and Janice will ship it to you anywhere in the United States. Or you can go to Vites.com. That's VITES, Vites.com, VITES.com. You can order it there too. And anyway, it's really good. And we hope you enjoy it, and everybody should order it.
That's right. Everybody.
And then also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel, rock slam that like button, and hit that notification button so that way when we have our next videos come up. And also subscribing to the channel gets the word out to other people who haven't seen our stuff. So we really appreciate that support from everybody. If you've got any questions or comments for Jim or for us, please go down below and write them in there. We read them. We respond to them. And if you've got questions for Jim, we'll take them up with him the next time we have him on the show. And if you'd like to support our channel, you can buy us a coffee. There's a link in the description down below. And any money we get from that is just used to support the channel, pay for our expenses on this and stuff like that. So we've enjoyed having you on for sure.
Yeah.
I think people are going to find this very interesting, and there's a lot more to go in terms of stories and things that we want to talk to you about. So
yes. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.